Hello, everyone, and welcome to the All About Repositories web seminar series. Today, we're going to be talking about what's new in Fedora 3.3 and DSpace 1.6. My name is Carol Mint-Morris. I'll be your moderator today. Joining me today are Chris Wilper, who will be talking about Fedora 3.3, and Stuart Lewis, all the way from New Zealand, who will be talking with us about DSpace 1.6. I wanted to tell you a little bit about our web seminar series to begin with. We highlight topics of interest for a global community of repository developers and managers. This series is co-sponsored by SPARC, the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. SPARC has become a catalyst for change, and its pragmatic focus, as many of you know, stimulates the emergence of new scholarly communication models that expand the dissemination of scholarly research and reduce financial pressures on libraries. DSpace, the other co-sponsor of the web seminar series, is a not-for-profit organization whose software and services are used worldwide as solutions for open access, institutional repositories, digital libraries, digital archives, data curation, virtual research environments, and more. And many of you are familiar with our open source technology portfolio that we will be talking about today that includes DSpace and Fedora. To kick it off, I'd like to introduce Chris Wilper, who is a DSpace technical lead and developer. He's been designing, developing, and supporting various forms of data management and publishing technologies since 1995. He developed Hewlett-Packard's first customer support website publishing technology in the mid-90s, worked as a document management consultant at Sun Microsystems in 2000, and has been working on Fedora and related open source software since 2002. Chris?
All right, thank you, Carol. So today I'm going to talk about what's new in the latest release of Fedora. That's Fedora 3.3. We did this release in December 2009. And I do also want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Fedora 3.4, but this will mostly focus on the Fedora 3.3 features and updates. And happy St. Patrick's Day. So I do want to talk a little about the project roles. We've actually changed this up a little bit in the latest release of Fedora in a really positive way. Previous releases of Fedora have had a release manager that was really supported directly through DSpace, formerly Fedora Commons. And this was really the first release that we had a community release manager drive the release forward. So one of our newer committers, Kai Sternad, who works for Fitzkarlsruhe in Germany and has worked with Fedora for quite some time, volunteered to be the release manager for 3.3. And I am glad to report he drove a really successful release out the door. We also have a few new committers since the 3.2 was delivered, and so these people contributed to the Fedora 3.3 release. Ben Armenter at Columbia University in the U.S. is a new committer. Steve Bayless from Acuity Unlimited in the U.K. And Asger Blekinge of the State and University Library in Denmark. Asger is the author of Enhanced Content Models for Fedora. Some of you that are familiar with Fedora may be also familiar with this. And that's something we're looking at rolling into future Fedora releases. So that brings our total of active committers up to 11, which is really nice to see. And we're hoping to grow that even more in the future. I just want to send out a quick reminder that it looks like the conference is, the audio channel is open to everyone. So if you've just dialed in, if you could please hit mute on your mic for us, that would be great. And just use the chat over to the right. to send in questions during the discussion, and I think we'll have a little break near the end to answer some of those questions that come in through that channel. So one of the major features of the Fedora 3.3 release was this feature that we're calling RELS-INT. And to put it fairly briefly, this has basically created the ability for people to create extended relationships and properties about their data streams that they've stored in the digital repository. The Fedora, for those who aren't maybe as familiar with Fedora from previous releases, the basic Fedora abstractions, or the things that the repository stores, are digital objects, which are kind of like a directory of files, and the things within them, which we call data streams, but they're essentially files. So these special data streams play a particular role in Fedora, and we've historically had this special data stream called RELS-INT, which allows one to state object relationships and properties. So if you have special information that you'd like to have indexed in your repository that's unique to your domain, then you can use this special data stream to express that information, and it will be indexed via the engine within Fedora, and it will be searchable as RDF with the Sparkle query language. So RELS-INT basically just extends on this idea and allows one to use to make statements about specific data streams within objects. So just to make it a little more visual, this is the basic model of a relationship between a couple Fedora objects that you have stored in your repository. So here we have a book and an author, and the book object, the object representing a book, contains a couple files or data streams, and the book, through the use of this special RELS-INT data stream, is able to assert that it has an author and is pointing to another object in the repository, which may have information just about that author, like a picture of the person and a Dublin Core description of the person. So with the RELS-INT feature, we can add this additional piece at the end, which wasn't possible before. So the sort of classic problem of being able to have metadata about metadata and so on is enabled via RELS-INT. So now that you can draw relationships between the data streams and objects, or data streams and anything, you can make more specific statements about them. So in this example, we've just added a description that says the Dublin Core about this book was asserted by some other person who is represented in the repository through a completely different object. So a couple of the other features which I want to go through, starting with the local file support in Fedora, were contributed all by some of the new committers on the project. So local file support was contributed by Ben Armenter of Columbia University. And I forgot to mention, but the RELS-INT functionality was also contributed by Steve Bayless. So local file support allows people to solve this problem of previously when you worked in Fedora, you had to send content into the repository via, the only way really to get it in was to send it in over the web APIs. And this works for a whole lot of cases, and it's a very flexible way of doing things. However, when the content is already stored locally, it just makes it that much easier to be able to point to the files and tell Fedora to read those files in. And this allows that. So this helps in cases where the content is maybe too big to, you have a lot of content you want to send into the repository. Well, it's already on the local system, so you want to be able to send that in more quickly. So this allows that. But it also opens up a possibility for people to misuse it if you're not careful. So we have disabled this feature by default. There's a security policy that comes with the release that people can use to open it up so that you can enable for your repository the ability for people to read things in only from certain directories, whatever you specify. So this allows people to use it in a more safe way, and we felt that having it disabled by default would be the wise thing to do. Speaking of security, we have another community contribution in Fedora 3.3, what we've been calling FESL, or the Fedora Enhanced Security Layer. So this is an experimental feature for Fedora 3.3, and it was developed by the previous developers of a related project to Fedora called Miradora, and the project was also led by MediaShelf, who does Fedora, provides services around Fedora, and also by the University of Prince Edward Island folks out there. So they came together and brought these institutions together who had some common needs to get the security framework in Fedora improved. And the specific improvements that were folded into 3.3 include improvements on the authentication side, so being able to identify correctly that people are who they say they are when they come into the repository. This was made simpler. It was also made easier to test. So although this is experimental, I think it will actually help a lot of people who are struggling with integrating systems like LDAP with their repository, because it has a little simpler way of allowing integrations to occur. On the authorization side, so writing policies around your objects in the repository, the big improvement that FESL brings there is the ability to create a policy that applies to an entire group of digital objects in the repository. So previously, when you made policies about the repository in Fedora, you either had to set the policy across the entire repository. So you could say, well, people in this repository can only access all the objects if they're in some group. Or you could make statements about individual objects. But if you wanted to make statements or authorization controls about groups of objects within the repository, that was pretty difficult because you'd have to go to each of those objects and set a policy for them. So this allows a more flexible way of doing that. It is experimental. It's not enabled with Fedora 3.3. It's just distributed with Fedora 3.3. It's an option when you run the installer. You'll see the ability to turn on FESL, and you can do that. We certainly encourage you to try it out and give us feedback. The next round of development for this is also started, and we're really starting to look at folding this in as a more permanent feature, sort of the default option for future releases of Fedora. We also have a series of improvements to the API in Fedora. So as many of you know, hopefully, Fedora is not an end-to-end repository solution. It's mostly just concerned with storing and providing access to these digital objects, which people then provide services and interfaces on top of. So the REST API improvements will appeal to people who develop these systems on top of Fedora. So for several releases, the REST API has grown in popularity, and a lot of people really prefer to use it with Fedora. And we've made a couple improvements with the API for this release, including fixing up a kind of a design problem with the API that it's pretty easy to get around, which is what that first point is speaking to. And then it also has support for invoking extended object methods in Fedora. So those of you who have been familiar with Fedora for some time know that it has this dissemination, or what we have previously called disseminators on these digital objects. Well, that capability is still present, but the REST API initially didn't include the ability to invoke those extra value-added representations of objects or capabilities on objects in the repository. So now it does. And this is also no longer experimental. So it was experimental for several releases, and we felt that with this release we could really put a seal of approval on it, so to speak, and really let people know that it's safe to use in production environments. And a lot of people already started doing that, but we like to make sure that we're not making changes as radically once people start depending on things. So that's our promise for this release, as we won't be making backward incompatible changes. Other improvements, another nice contribution we got from David Handy of the Idaho National Labs. David provided a Microsoft SQL Server plugin for Fedora. So this brings our Fedora database support up to 5 different databases, a nice mix of open source and commercial databases. So the usual suspects in open source, Oracle, Postgres.
Presentation mode is now enabled.
Oh, I misspoke, but then I wonder if folks, Carol, are you still there? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just heard this announcement. I guess everybody heard it. What I was going to say is on the open source side, what I meant was the usual suspects in open source, MySQL and Postgres and Derby. And now we've got support for SQL Server, and we've had support for Oracle for some time. HTTP proxy support. This was contributed by a developer at Fitzcarralls-Rue who needed this ability for the Fedora repository, since it interacts with content out on the web, to be able to go through web proxies. And he contributed that back, and we folded it in. There's also a significant effort to move Fedora's builds from an older technology to a newer technology, and that's specifically from Ant to Maven. A lot of the developers have been wanting to do this for quite some time, and we decided it would be a good move for us to involve more developers in the process to use a more favored tool. And this migration was pretty big job, and it's not really seen on the from the end user perspective, but it does definitely contribute to the overall quality of the product, and will help us, I think, quite a bit over time. So that was very nice to see. And then we have a few bundled software updates. So Fedora includes a semantic web triple store, Mulgara. That's been updated to a more recent version that has several bug fixes and query performance improvements. For certain queries, you'll see a real improvement there. We've also updated to the latest stable version of Tomcat. That's Tomcat 6 for the bundled version. Again, this is just the bundled side. Fedora is able to be installed in several different web app containers, but Tomcat is quite popular, and that's our standard for doing integration tests. So if you use it, you can be sure that that's been well tested against. We also updated Derby to address a bug that was reported, and turns out it was an issue with something in Derby that had been fixed. So if you choose to use that database, you shouldn't see the hanging problem that was reported. And we've got specifics on the bug fixes that have occurred. They're all logged on the release notes, so you can go in there and check it out. I think I'm running a little long on time, so I'm going to just jump to the next one real quick. But there is a link. I understand that this presentation will be available later for folks to check things out in more detail. And then we have the process for 3.4 has started. So we've actually, I should have mentioned here that we've got another release manager lined up. So Steve Bayless has volunteered to do release manager for the next release of Fedora. We had an excellent developer meeting in London last month and started to talk about the scoping for the release, both what people have been talking about, what people want, and some of the ideas some of the developers have of how to push the repository platform forward. We also have ongoing special topics meetings that are open to the public for people to come in and talk with us and to help us come up with the correct set of things that people want for future releases of Fedora. This is a series that we've been doing weekly for a little over a year. Basically what we do is we have developer meetings every week, and when we get close to releases, those developer meetings focus more on specific tasks that the developers are working on. But when we're early on in the release cycle, like we are with 3.4, those developer meetings really focus more on scoping for the release and some of the bigger topics. So the details of what's upcoming there are posted on our wiki if folks want to come in and check it out. Some of the likely candidates for Fedora 3.4, I mentioned Asger had an enhanced content model plugin for Fedora. One of the big topics at the London meeting was actually folding some of that in to the repository as sort of the default option, because it's been very well received in the community. We have several improvements lined up to improve Fedora's linked data profile, so specifically allowing relationships between objects to really be seen as relationships between web resources. I mentioned we want to adopt Fezzle's authentication as the default, and we're also doing something under the hood which should contribute quite a bit to the quality of and stability of the platform moving forward, which is moving to the Spring framework to handle dependency injection for us. And lastly, I just want to mention how you can get involved with the project. Certainly if you're new to Fedora, download it and check it out. And we have a very helpful user list out there that you can ping and ask questions and get help. Also, if you're developer-oriented and maybe you have ideas for Fedora or want to get involved in those discussions, our developer list is open and also quite active. As I mentioned, we have special topic meetings every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. The agendas are always put on our wiki page, so folks can check into what's going to happen this coming week and see if they'd like to participate. But typically the developers, most of the developers show up to those. Also, as you get more involved with the software and you have specific things you'd like to maybe work on, we'd love to see patches and love to apply those. And ultimately, that's a really good way also to become a committer yourself. So we do have a nomination process to get new developers involved in the project. And that's been really successful so far, and we'd love to get more people involved at that level too. And that's the link at the bottom there is where you can find more information about how to get involved and these meetings that we hold. So it's just fedoracommons.org go FC repo. I think we're doing questions at the very end, so I'm going to pass to Carol. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Chris. That was extremely informative. Two housekeeping issues before we move on. I'd like to thank everyone who have perhaps joined us a little bit late and remind you to please mute your telephones and use our IM facility, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen, to add questions. At the end of the presentation, we will get to as many of them as we can. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Stuart Lewis, who will be our next presenter. Stuart Lewis was the release coordinator for DSpace 1.6 and is a member of the DSpace committers group. He works as the IT Innovations Analyst and Developer at the University of Auckland Library. As well as developing DSpace, Stuart is also a member of the SWORD development team defining the SWORD repository deposit standard and has created innovative repository deposit tools such as the Facebook SWORD deposit application and Easy Deposit. Stuart is also well known as the creator of the Repository 66 repository mashup map. So take it away, Stuart.
Hi, yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, I think.
Yes, you can. Okay, brilliant. Excellent. Good morning from New Zealand. It's 7:30 here on Thursday morning. We're a little bit ahead of everybody else. So what I'd like to talk about this morning is DSpace 1.6, which is the release, our latest release that came out a couple of weeks ago. Now, just to sort of introduce where we are, I just thought I'd sort of put up all the different versions we've had of DSpace over the past 8 years now, just so you can sort of see where we are. We had our first release back in November of 2002, and here we are sort of, whatever that is, sort of 7.5 years later in 2010, and we've just released our latest version. So as you can see, we've sort of been around a little while and developing continuously as we go along. Now, over the history of DSpace, we've evolved in different ways. The way the software has usually evolved is simply sort of we take any contributions that come along and we put those in. We look at anything that the sort of core developers of DSpace want to see in there, typically driven by our institutions. We put those in. But what we thought we'd do with 1.6 is try something slightly different. So we went out to the community with a survey, a really, really simple survey of one question saying, what 3 features should make it into DSpace 1.6? So we wanted to find out what the 3 big missing features were that people would want to see. So we did that about 10 months ago now. And the results that we came back with, they didn't really surprise us too much, but the results were we want better statistics. So we want sort of item level statistics. We can see statistics just for each item, who's downloaded them, where they've come from, what files they've been looking at, that sort of thing. We want an embargo facility, and we want batch metadata editing. So what we did is we assigned 3 different committers, one for each of those features, to really drive it forward to make sure those 3 features were included in the release. So they're our biggest 3 features that we've got, so I'll talk through those quickly. So the first is statistics. This was developed by one of the services companies that operate with DSpace at Maya, and also a bit of help from the Library Consortium in New Zealand, who developed the JSP version of statistics. What they did was went completely back to basics and developed a whole new framework to store statistical events, things that happen in DSpace, such as somebody reads an item, somebody looks at a collection, somebody downloads a bitstream, that sort of thing. And then they built this framework to be able to store those events in Solr. And then what that allows us is basically you have this nice big index now with DSpace 1.6 of all the events that take place with your repository, and you can then query them. So out the box, there's reports that give you statistics for each item, who's downloaded it, where they've come from, so which city and country they live in, sort of over time, which month. So you can sort of see, this month I had 10 downloads of a paper, whereas last month it was only downloaded 8 times, that sort of thing. So the statistics feature is now there in DSpace. However, it's likely it will improve an awful lot over the next year, because I said this is a big framework that's been written. So as people sort of start to get used to that framework, I'm sure we'll see much better statistical reports. We'll be able to see sort of, I'm sure people will start writing reports for how to look at your whole repository. So, for example, you can see the top 20 items that have been downloaded, or you can see where the visitors to the whole of your repository have come from rather than just for a single item. So we've got this great platform now that's in 1.6, so we can build on even more in subsequent versions. The next feature that was asked for was embargoes. So again, we have a sort of a framework for this. Because we know with embargoes, they're quite institutionally specific. For some people, an embargo might mean locking an item down completely so it's invisible, whereas for other people, an embargo might be, well, we're happy for people to know it's there, to see metadata about an item, but we want to lock the files down so that you can't see them. You know, maybe if it's an open access research publishing repository and you have items in there from a publisher that has a 6-month embargo, then you're happy for people to know the research is there, but you don't want the files to be available. So Richard Rogers from MIT and Larry Stone from Harvard came together to create an embargo framework, which is a flexible framework to allow people to sort of write their own embargo rules, so logic for what an embargo means to them. Out the box, it comes with quite a simple embargo that should suit an awful lot of people, hopefully, which is where you just enter a single date and then it will embargo the files. However, I said it's relatively easy now to also write your own implementation. So you decide how an embargo gets set, how the date gets set, and then when the embargo is lifted, what happens. Then the third of the 3 new features is batch metadata editing, which is something that we made down here in New Zealand between the University of Auckland and the Library Consortium in New Zealand again. What this allows you to do is people wanted to be able to edit metadata in bulk, and DSpace obviously didn't allow that facility at all. So we thought, well, it's going to be quite hard to write a really comprehensive tool within DSpace to do this. We thought, well, why not make use of other tools that exist out there? So we all know how to use Excel or the OpenOffice equivalent, the spreadsheet programs. We thought, well, why not export to Excel or OpenOffice, and then we can actually harness the power of those tools. So those tools, for example, you can copy and paste, you can spell check, you can move data, you can delete data, you can add data. It's all very easy to use. They're tools we use from day to day. So what you can do is you can export the metadata either for a group of items, for whole collections, whole communities, or indeed your whole repository into Excel or OpenOffice. And you can also, if you want to, do search or browser results. So if you wanted to just edit papers, for example, that have been written by me, edit the metadata, then you can search for all my items and then just hit the edit button. This is only available as an administrator, I should say. Hit the sort of export button and then you'll be able to get all the metadata. What that then does is once you've exported the metadata, it'll open it up in your browser, open up Excel for you or OpenOffice, and you've got your spreadsheet for all the metadata. You can then do different things to it. For example, you might tidy it up, perform a spell check on it. You might restructure your metadata, so maybe move elements from one metadata field to another if you realise you've been misusing the metadata for a while. You might do a global find and replace if you, say, misspelt the surname in all the records and you want to change them all. You can do that within Excel. So those are some of the use cases you can do. And then what you do once you've made your changes, you upload that Excel file back into DSpace through the user interface. You don't have to go to the command line to do any of this, although if you want to, you can. You upload it through the user interface, through the administration control panel. It then scans the metadata that you upload, looks for any changes you've made, sort of highlights them to you and says, I've detected this change, and this change. Is that correct? And if you say, yes, that's correct, then it goes away and makes those changes. Now, the batch metadata editing feature also has a few other tricks up its sleeves. It can do more than just sort of edit metadata. You can actually add new metadata items only if you want to. You can put your metadata in the right format in the spreadsheet, and in the column that would normally have the item identifier, if you just put a plus in there, it knows it's a new item and it'll import it in. So if you have spreadsheets of metadata, this is a new way of getting them into DSpace. You can also move items between collections and map items into new collections. Currently, if you want to move items, you've either got to log into the database and do it by hand, or you can do it via the user interface, but you can only move one item at a time. What you can now do is you can do this within the spreadsheet. There's a column for which collection an item is in, and you can just sort of update all those quickly and then re-upload your metadata, and it will move those items. So hopefully it's quite a new, quite a useful feature, and certainly the feedback we've had already, people backing that up, saying they're finding it really, really useful. So those were the big three features that we created for 1.6, and we decided to wait to release 1.6 until all three were finished, because we promised those three. And so we're really happy with 1.6 that we've got all those in. We think it makes for a really good release of DSpace. Now, I was going to finish here talking about new features, but as I've said many times, we have a really great DSpace community. While the groups were busy developing those three features, we got a lot more given to us at the same time. So I'll just run through some of the other features that you'll find in 1.6. The first is the documentation has had a good treatment now. We've recruited what we call a documentation gardener, which is, I think, a term we pinched from the Fedora community. Jeffrey Trimble from Young State University. He's done a fantastic job of going through all of the documentation line by line, taking out what doesn't need to be there or what's out of date, putting in all the new documentation we need for the new features, making sure it all makes sense, and hopefully you'll find the documentation that we've got now is an awful lot better than we've ever had before, so we're really happy with that. We now have OAI-PMH and OAI-ORE harvesting support. Now, obviously, since day one, DSpace has always had OAI-PMH support for other people to harvest our DSpace repositories. But what we wanted was for DSpace to be able to harvest items from other repositories, so you can actually suck items directly into your DSpace repository. So there's different use cases for this. For example, if you've got a dark archive and a light archive, you might want to move items across. Or if you're creating an aggregation repository of a lot of different repositories, you want to pull things in. So you can now do that. You can either have the traditional regular collections in DSpace where humans submit the items, or you can have collections which pull in from external sources. That was created by Texas A&M. We have authority control, which again is a very big feature, which allows input fields in the submission interfaces to be tied to authority control lists. So, for example, out of the box, we have examples for the Library of Congress name authority files, Sherpa Romeo journal names and publishers tied to ISSNs, that sort of thing. And so you can write your own authority control sources, link them up, and then you get sort of nice, these AJAX autocomplete searches to start typing the letters in, and it finds out what matches there are. So this is a really nice feature which I think has become very popular. Again, created by Larry Stone and Andrea Bellini. We then have DSpace services. For the administrators, this is something hopefully you'll never see. For the people that like delving in and getting deep into the code, this is something you'll start to come across now. This is one of a service locator framework, which was developed under the DSpace 2 work that was done a year or so ago and funded by JISC. So that was developed by these developers and just allows us to do, I suppose, some clever stuff behind the scenes with the way different parts of the code fit together. We have a script launcher. Anybody who's ever used who hosts DSpace on a Windows server will know that DSpace up to now has only ever shipped with scripts for the Unix platform. So what we now do with the script launcher is you only actually have one script, which is known as DSpace, rather than having all the different scripts. And then after that script, you can place different commands. So all the commands you're used to running, such as filter media or index updates and this sort of thing. So we ship one script for Windows, one for Unix, and then that allows you to run all the different command line options that you need to. Open OpenSearch is for something developed, well, OpenSearch wasn't, but the DSpace support for it was developed by Richard Rogers at MIT, which is an atom feed of search results, allows you to sort of other systems to be able to programmatically search your DSpace repository. Security improvements. We had some great guys from NYU do some security audits on DSpace for us. As it says here, no web application is 100% safe. So like all web-based platforms, we have to ensure DSpace protects against common security issues. So the web constantly changes, the security environment constantly changes. There are new sort of attack vectors, ways people find to attack software all the time. So we constantly have to keep on top of that and make sure DSpace sort of meets all the modern security systems that it should. So NYU have given us a few patches just to bring a few parts of security up to scratch. So we're pleased with those. Now, if you're not satisfied with all of those, then there are actually a lot of other features that have come in. I'm not going to run through all these because there's too many of them, but we've had dozens and dozens of extra features that have been contributed by the community. We've also made not only improvements to the product, we've made improvements to the way we develop it as well. So as it says here, we've made development process improvements. Before we started 1.6, we sort of traditionally, we'd only have a development meeting maybe about once a year, so it's quite a big thing. We've changed to having these once a week instead, so that's quite a shift, as you can imagine. But it's meant things develop a lot faster, we get a lot more feedback, we get a lot more discussion around what we're doing, so it's been really good. We've also, through that, been able to keep up with our sort of bug tracking software. So before, sometimes an item could sit on the bug tracking system for months before anyone looked at it. Now we sort of try to make sure it's looked at within a week or two, and we sort of look through every issue together, all the developers together. So sort of the methods we've used to develop the software have changed as well. So in total, again, near the end now, we've had over 100, we've had 142 updates. I counted them all yesterday. 142 updates to DSpace 1.6 from the previous version. So it's quite a big release, and we're really excited about it. We're really pleased with it, what we've been able to get in there, and we hope that you are too if you start using it. We always like to say thank you, obviously, because it's developed by dozens of people, this software. Now, I will apologise now because this only has about a third of the institutions who actually contributed on there, but I only had a short time to sort of go around and pick up logos. But these are a few of the institutions that have devoted time and effort to the software to develop in 1.6. So we're really pleased that you did that, and we want to give you a public sort of thanks for having done so. DSpace is completely community driven and developed. Without the members of the community, sort of the software doesn't happen. So what's next? Chances are we think we'll probably start developing 1.7 very soon, which means we'll be looking for a new release manager. So if you'd like to be a release manager, then sort of get in contact. You don't have to be a programmer or technical, sort of, as long as you know and love DSpace, I suppose, and want to see it develop further. As I said, DSpace is developed by the community, so I just want to ask, what do you think your role is in it? If you're not involved now, how could you get involved? We benefit from everybody's involvement. If you've got any questions about any of this, please ask at the end, or sort of get in touch with me. My email address is over there. So thank you very much. These are some image credits, I think, from the two presentations that you've had that we have to put up. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back over to Carol now to take questions.
Thank you very much, Stuart and Chris Wilper. We do have some questions, and I will go through them in the order that they were received through our chat channel. The first one goes to Chris, and Michael Levy asks, is there really supposed to be three slashes, file, : //? Chris?
Actually, I think there are. Even though the file URI scheme is kind of a not very well understood and documented by different systems. Turns out that there's a couple common ways of doing it, and yeah, one is with a single slash, one's with two, and then of course on Windows you have like 3 slashes, a C, and a vertical bar. So.
Well, thanks. I think if people want to unmute their phones and jump in at this point, that would be fine. But I'll go through the questions, and if we have more at the end, we can add them on. You can just verbally jump in. Federico Machini asks, where is it possible to have more information on the enhanced content model? This is for Chris.
That's a good question. We actually have a couple links to it. So Asger, the developer of enhanced content models, has put together a website describing it. I believe it's hosted on SourceForge, and I should be able to pull that up pretty quick, and I will paste the URL in there. But he describes the work that he's done, and I mentioned earlier that we're planning on folding some of that work, some of the key pieces, into future releases, so that some of that documentation will become part of the official Fedora documentation.
Thanks, Chris. Well, if you just paste that into the IM channel, I think everyone should have that. Ronnie asked, how would you delete metadata from a collection? And I believe this is for Stuart on DSpace.
I'm guessing that you're talking about using the batch metadata editing tool to do this.
Is Ronnie on the call? Do you want to, Ronnie, if you're on the call, do you want to ask a little further? I don't know if she's on the call, so go ahead.
Oh, well, assuming you're using the batch metadata editing tool, each metadata element, so, title, author, abstract, that sort of thing, gets put in its own column. So what you can do is if you delete all the data from that column, and then when you re-upload the file back into DSpace, it'll notice that the column is still there, but it's empty. And then it'll highlight the fact that you've removed those pieces of metadata, and then if you confirm, it will actually delete them. However, you have to leave the column there. If you just delete the whole column, when you re-import it into DSpace, it'll go, well, the whole column is missing because there's no column header. I'll just ignore that and I'll not act upon it. So yes, you can do it. Just make sure you leave the column there, but empty all the contents from it.
Thanks, Stuart. Jessica Lindham asked, I'm curious which benefits, drawbacks there would be to switch to Fedora as the framework for a smaller university repository. Any success stories? Have mainly seen Fedora usage for national libraries as for now. So I think this is a question maybe Chris and Stuart might both comment on.
Yeah, I think maybe if I could start, I think it's the classic trade-off of customizability versus how much developer work you have to put into the thing. So I think that's the big trade-off. I wouldn't suggest if you don't have access to developers and you ultimately want to provide a user-facing application that you necessarily start with Fedora or switch to Fedora and expect not to have to do much. On the other hand, I think that several people have had success in some of these up-and-coming applications, such as Islandora and Muradora previously, which have been developed on top of Fedora for more specific use cases. So I would recommend if you're thinking about Fedora but you don't have much programming resource available to you, then consider look at which front ends are available and see if any of those meet your needs.
Stuart, would you like to add anything to that?
I don't think so, really. I think Chris covered it very well.
Okay. The next question comes from Greg Hammer, and he's curious about DuraCloud. Can presenters comment on DuraCloud and current status of Fedora evolving into and integrating with DuraCloud? This isn't specifically our topic for today, but perhaps Chris could comment on this briefly.
Sure. I'll give the most accurate info I can. Kind of wish we had someone here from the DuraCloud team, but I'll try to represent. So DuraCloud is currently in the pilot process with a few selected pilot partners and trying to prove out some specific use cases of using cloud storage in the way that DuraCloud has provided this sort of mediation layer for different cloud storage providers. And one of the other interesting pieces that they've just started to work on is providing additional services on top of this storage out in the cloud. So image conversion as a service sitting out, running out in the cloud along with your content that's stored out there. That's ultimately, I'm sure we'll hear much more detailed and ultimately accurate information at open repositories in a few months. But I do know the process is definitely moving along. There's a lot of interest and excitement about it, and I think they're also looking at getting the pilot group expanded very, very soon. As far as Fedora's integration with DuraCloud, there's actually work to integrate both Fedora and DSpace with DuraCloud starting up. But what it gets down to, I think, is being able to take the content in the repository, the entire intellectual content, and being able to push it out to the cloud, at least as some sort of backup for that content, but potentially to be able to provide that to other services that might want to run over that content, image conversion, all kinds of data analysis tools and things like that. So I've actually been involved with doing that on the Fedora side with a Fedora plugin that is still in development, but is intended to just allow you to configure it so that when you're running Fedora, you can choose to additionally send that content out to DuraCloud. So it'll still store it wherever you've told it to, like locally, but you can have it over time sort of trickle the content out and make it available also out in cloud storage. And I think Tim Donahue has started the process with DSpace, but I'm not exactly sure where that's at right now. I know it's still in development, not quite sure how far it's gotten yet.
Thanks, Chris. I would just add to everyone on the call, if you want to learn more about DuraCloud, just stay tuned to future All About Repositories web seminars, and we'll probably be featuring a DuraCloud web seminar in the next few months. Next question, Martin Courtois asks, will DSpace 1.6 statistics be able to report file downloads as well as item record views? I think this is for Stuart.
Excuse me. Yes, it can. It actually splits it up into each file as well. So if an item has multiple files, when you click on the View Statistics link, it downloads the actual item and then downloads for each individual bit stream.
Thanks. And then Jessica Lindham also asks regarding DSpace, is there a 1.6.1 to be expected?
Yes. It's in very early days actually debating where we go next, but what the consensus seems to be at the moment is we'll start developing 1.7 straight away, try and do that a bit quicker than we did 1.6, maybe sort of 6 months away, put the new features in there. But yes, certainly keep an eye on 1.6. If there's bugs that come up that affect 1.6, then we'll release, 1.6.1, maybe a 1.6.2 if we need to, but they'll be much more just bug fixes rather than getting any new features in there.
Thanks, Stuart. Jason Sterneman asks, does stats data persist in Solr or remain stored in logs? How easy is it to index in an existing Solr install? I think this is for Chris.
For me, I think this one.
Oh, for you.
By the sounds of it.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, there's two sides to this. At the moment, the current plan is to keep everything in Solar. However, the log files are still created, and DSpace 1.6 ships with scripts that will read your sort of DSpace, the traditional DSpace logs, and import that content into Solar. So whilst the Solar is where it's intended to be, if for some reason you ever lose your Solar indexes, then as long as you've got all your log files, you should be able to import them in. And that's actually something I missed from the presentation. If you do have your DSpace log files going back for a few years, you can actually import them into the new statistics package so that you get all your old data into Solar.
Another question for you, Stuart, from Anne Devenish. For IRs that are using DSpace 1.5.2, do you suggest we move to 1.6, or should we wait for 1.6.1 or 1.6.2?
Good question. It's probably a question I can't actually answer honestly at the moment, in that, we know there's been at least a dozen or so institutions that have upgraded to 1.6, but until they've been running it for 2 or 3 months, we don't know, if there's any major bugs in there. We'd like to think there aren't. Certainly we've done a lot of testing. We had several sort of candidate releases as we sort of improved it until we got it to a state where we thought it was safe to release. We don't know of any big showstop bugs at the present that should stop you from upgrading to 1.6. However, they're probably not going to raise their heads for another month or so. So, if you want to play it safe, then maybe leave it a month or so, get in touch and see if 1.6 is as stable as we hope it is. And hopefully it is. Or whether, we found a few issues that it might be worth waiting for 1.6.1 for those to be fixed.
Thank you. I think we've just about run out of questions, and we've almost run out of time. At this point, if anyone has an additional question that you'd just like to ask our presenters, Chris Wilper or Stuart Lewis, please, I invite you to just jump on. We'll wait a moment or two. If not, I want to thank Chris and Stuart once again, and thank all of you for joining us today. Please tune in to the next All About Repositories web seminar, and good luck with your repository implementation.